I thought this afternoon, some of you might be interested to know a little bit about my time in the military. As best I can recall, I spent 28 years on active and reserve duty. I graduated from college in 1954, reported to law school in the fall of 1954, and wasn't in law school for more than 6 months when the draft board in Pasadena, California, sent me a message encouraging me to report upon the conclusion of my first year of law school for an induction into the Armed Forces of the United States. I was particularly annoyed with this communication because I had secured for myself an absolutely gorgeous room in the Lawyers Club, which was the dormitory portion of the University of Michigan School of Law. And I was really annoyed that I had to give up that room, but duty calls. So I returned home, reported to the draft board, and they said, "Mr. Small, we really appreciate your coming in. Turns out we don't need you right now." Accordingly, please return to law school and we'll be in touch with you when you graduate. I finished law school in 1957, and the bastards remembered where I was, and they sent me another letter encouraging me to report to my draft board upon my return from school. I decided that I would rather seek a direct commission in the military as a legal officer, but to do that, I had to pass the bar exam. In the late 1950s, it was very unusual for states to let someone take their bar exam if you were not a resident of the state. But Michigan had an exception to recognize people who were on military duty or who would be on military duty when the bar exam was next regularly given. So what I did was decide that instead of going to Fort Lauderdale for booze and broads, I would stay at Michigan and I would take the Michigan bar exam. They allowed me to do it because my draft notice said I would have to report when the bar exam was given the next time after the spring break. So I took the bar exam in Michigan, and lo and behold, I passed it. So all I had to do to finish law school and to get into the military was graduate. And so I worked hard, passed all my classes, and so then I started applying for direct commissions. I applied to the Army, I applied to the Navy, I applied to the Air Force. And each branch of service offered me a commission as an O2. Now, in the Army, the Marine Corps, that would be, and the Air Force, that would be a first lieutenant. In the Navy, that would be a lieutenant JG, junior grade. So, which branch to accept? Well, the choice was made relatively easy for me. I went back to California, although I had to fly back to Michigan in the fall to be admitted to the Michigan bar. So then I checked that box. So now it was a question of when could I took the California bar, I passed it. So now the question is, could I be admitted to the California bar before I had to go into the military? So I set up the dates. I was to be admitted to the bar on January 8, 1958. Somewhere following that date, the next available date for reporting for military duty was the Air Force. Date after the Air Force was report to Fort Ord in California as a draftee in the Army. I could have done that and then called up my commission in the Army and gotten out of being a draftee. But I decided, hell, as long as I've got this, I might as well do it. So my father, who had served as an officer in the Second World War, insisted that I buy a Class A uniform, that I wear it on the plane flying to San Antonio, Texas, and that I report to the Officers Basic Military Course in uniform. None of the documents that I had from the Air Force said anything about showing up in uniform. In fact, they inferred that once I got there, they'd take me to the appropriate store and would help me get my uniforms, plural, summer, winter, formal, all that stuff. But so my father drove me to the Los Angeles airport, let me out. I had my suitcase, and I'm wearing my Air Force uniform as a first lieutenant. And I'm walking toward the terminal, and then in front of me, I see someone coming toward me in a blue uniform. 4 stripes on each sleeve, on the cuff of each sleeve, which would denote the rank of an 06, a captain in the Navy. And so as I got closer to this person, I thought, what the hell do I do? So I saluted. And this officer, who turned out to be a captain for American Airlines, returned my salute. Said, good luck, son. And so off I flew to San Antonio, Texas for a 3 or 4 month course called Officers Basic Military Course, where they helped us acquire our uniforms, taught us how to put our insignia on our uniforms, taught us the basic customs and courtesies of the military with emphasis on being an officer. We also had to learn to march. We also had to learn how to give commands. And so we were taken out onto the side of the airstrip, and where we would order commands, forward, march, attention, hunt, all of those things. And the rule was that you didn't have to obey if you couldn't hear it. The goal was to get us to be able to really give a command type voice. But this class that I was in consisted of direct commissions as first lieutenants in the Air Jag and several direct commission captains in the medical corps who were going through the same course and who would be assigned to other parts of the world. I went to class. I gobbled it up because I wanted to be in the military. I wanted to be an officer. And one morning, our training officer failed to appear. And so I'd had 1 semester of ROTC in high school. None of the other people in the group had ever been in the military. So I formed them up in a column of 2, told them right face, and I marched on the left-hand side of the column as I saw that's what all the other training officers did. And we started marching for class. Coming toward us was a column of Women's Air Force candidates who were going through training at Lackland Air Force Base. And so as we came along, I saluted the officer, the captain, who returned my salute and said to me, "Lieutenant, your troops are gazing." My troops were not only gazing, they were breaking ranks. They were asking for names and phone numbers, trying to get dates, and it was pretty much a disaster. But I got us to class. Our training officer commended me for my initiative and said, "Please don't do that again. It's embarrassing." So we finished our training, and the last formal gathering of all of the students was that they handed us our orders for our first permanent assignment, called the PCA, Permanent Change of Assignment. And the officers' names were read, and the places that they were going in the world were announced. Most of the places were in Germany, France, Italy, Japan. They were what they called concurrent tours, which meant if you were married, and there were only 2 bachelors in this class, I was one of them, it meant that you could take your wife and children with you at government expense. And so all of the concurrent tours were announced. And then they read the tours for the bachelor officers. The first award went to K5, an airfield in Korea. This was 1957. 58, I'm sorry, 58. This was called a hardship tour because you couldn't take family. The second and last hardship tour was Keflavik Airport in Iceland. And so I think I had leave, went home, hugged my mother and father, didn't wear my uniform, didn't salute American Airlines captains, went back to the airport, flew from Los Angeles to someplace in New Jersey, an Air Force base there, where Icelandic Airlines provided transportation to Iceland. And so onto the plane I get, and off we fly. And now I'm in Class A uniform, and we're flying over water, and it looks way, way far down, and it looks very choppy, and it looks very, very cold. So hours and hours later, the plane lands in Keflavik, Iceland, military installations. And I wasn't in any hurry to do anything. You know, I figured I'd get off the plane when it was comfortable, and I'd get my bag, and I'd walk into the terminal, and probably there'd be somebody there who'd call for me. So I'm waiting in the plane for the last people to get out when an Air Force first lieutenant bursts into the plane. "Lieutenant Small, Lieutenant Small, where in God's sake are you, Lieutenant Small?" It was a lieutenant from Phoenix, Arizona. And I was his replacement. And it was important that I be there. Otherwise, he couldn't go back to the United States, called the ZI, the Zone of the Interior. And so he hugged me and he said, "Here, I'll carry your luggage." And so we're walking into the terminal, and a band is playing "Happy Days Are Here Again." And I thought, gee, that's really nice. And the lieutenant, his name was Ed Lowry, Ed said, no, that's not for you. That's for me, because I get to go home now. So Ed, is my escort. He checks me in. I I sign in the log that shows that I've arrived, the time of day and the time of the hour. And I'm taken to a barracks building, concrete barracks building, and I'm up on the top floor. And the sign on the door says something like Iceland Air Defense Force. And in this building, in this floor, were quartered the dentists, the doctors, the air police officers, and the legal officers. And it was by invitation only. And a great deal of alcohol was stored in every room. And I began to learn about how to be an Air Force officer. And because Iceland was a bit cold and snowy, you'd leave your barracks and you'd walk to the next barracks and you'd go all the way through it. And ultimately, after going through maybe 6 barracks, you'd arrive at the headquarters building where the legal office was. And I reported to the staff judge advocate, who was a lieutenant colonel, who turned out to be a marvelous, marvelous mentor. He really broke me in and helped me learn what to do. And so I started out, as is customary, being an assistant prosecuting attorney with a minor role in a general court-martial. The most serious court-martials were general court-martials, which, if the crime was appropriate, could lead to the penalty of death. Most court-martials were special court-martials, where the maximum punishment was 6 months confinement. My responsibility was to put in this was a case of manslaughter, in which the defendant was charged with causing the death of another airman by hitting his head against a pool table in a fight. And so my job was to put in the cause of death, which was a subarachnoid hemorrhage. My roommate was one of the base doctors. And so he was going to be my professional witness. He would put in the cause of death because he performed the autopsy. So I interviewed him and we became great friends. And life goes on, and I get more and more responsibility. And ultimately, I'm allowed to try general court-martials as well as special court-martials. My most significant event in Iceland was when I performed the duty of an officer of the day. This was performed by company-grade officers, lieutenants and captains. And you went on duty at 1800 hours, 6 p.m., and you were on duty until 0600 the following morning. And you were the representative of the base commander. If any problem came up, it was referred to the officer of the day. The officer of the day then determined where within the command the problem should be referred. Iceland had Navy aircraft stationed there. It also had Air Force aircraft stationed there. These were combat aircraft. These were aircraft that, although we weren't supposed to know it, everybody did, that some of them were armed with nuclear weapons. Our big problem was that the Russians had submarines off Iceland, and they were constantly trying to find out what the hell was going on. So part of my duty as officer of the day was to put on a steel helmet, strap on my 45, and a Jeep would arrive at the headquarters building with a 50 caliber machine gun mounted on a boom, and a staff sergeant driver who also served as the gunner. And my orders included, if I found suspicious suspects in or about our combat aircraft, I was to call out and order the person to surrender. And if they refused to do so, I was to have him shot. So we're out traveling through the area and we have a searchlight and we see somebody underneath an aircraft. Jeep stops, flashlight, this beam is put on it. Sergeant gets in back, racks back the lever, and is ready to shoot. And he said, "Shall I shoot, Lieutenant?" And I said, "No, I'm going down there and see what the hell this is." So I take a flashlight, leave my gun in my holster, go down under the airplane, and there is a gentleman in a very finely tailored tweed suit, relieving himself on the landing gear of one of the Air Force Pride and Joy. I take him into custody, which meant putting him in the front seat of the Jeep, called the air police. They sent out the Icelandic police because this person appeared to be an Icelandic civilian. They take custody of this man, and I complete my tour of duty, go home, go to bed, and I'm awakened at 8 a.m., pounding on the door with a messenger telling me that I'm to report at once to the base commander's office. So I put on my uniform, I go to the base commander's office, where I am admonished for failing to carry out my orders, and advised that this would not look well on my record and that the colonel would personally see to it that I had no meaningful career in the Air Force because I could not follow orders. I stepped out of the colonel's office. Same little messenger was there. I'm to report to the office of the United States ambassador. So I go down the hall and I report to the ambassador, and he gets up, throws his arms around me, says, "God damn, Lieutenant, thank goodness you exercised judgment. Do you know who that man was?" And I said, "No, sir, I have no idea." Said he was a member of the Icelandic Althing. That's their parliament. He had been attending a social event on base, had gone out to look for some place to go to the bathroom, had gotten lost. And the United States Department of State is eternally grateful that you did not shoot that man, because probably we would not be stationed here until any longer than the end of this month. So as far as I know, although I've never picked up my Air Force records, nothing was ever done in my records that impacted my career. I came back from Iceland in sometime in 1961, married Fern. We drove across country to Travis Air Force Base, where I reported to the base legal office and served there for at least a year and got promoted to captain, 03. And had a wonderful time, made great friends, and the staff judge advocate was a man named Jack Durand, lieutenant colonel, best lawyer I ever met in the military. And he later retired and became a Superior Court judge in Solano County. But he really whipped me into shape. When it was time for me to conclude my 3 years of service, because I accepted a commission, I was offered a commission in the regular Air Force, a career officer, and I was offered a concurrent tour anywhere in the world I wanted to go if there was a vacancy there. I thought, gosh, I'm 27, 25, 26, 27. no children, lovely wife. This would be a fabulous chance to see the world. I've never really seen the world. Fern hated the Air Force, hated it, would not have anything to do with it. And so I left active duty, moved to Sausalito, went to practice law in San Francisco. And I wasn't doing that very long before the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred. And they asked for volunteer legal officers to activate and go back in the reserves, which I did. And I went to Hamilton Air Force Base, which was up in Marin County. The base was a fighter interceptor base. Before I had been in the Air Transport Command. And the unique thing about this base was that promotions were on a unit of vacancy basis. If the unit had room for 3 captains, 2 majors, 1 lieutenant colonel, and one of the major positions became vacant, the captain, regardless of length of service, the captain with the highest ranking or rating or officer efficiency reports became a major. I became a major. Next thing I knew, a year later, I was a lieutenant colonel. And then they closed Hamilton Air Force Base and sent me back to Travis, where I again served in the base legal office as a lieutenant colonel. And about a year later, I was promoted to colonel, 06, and transferred to 22nd Air Force, which was the command organization at Travis Air Force Base, where my duties involved advising a major general who was the commanding officer of 22nd Air Force. Time goes by, and they transfer me to Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. Scott Air Force Base was the headquarters of the Military Airlift Command, now called MAC, M-A-C. And my job was to be the mobilization augmentee to the staff judge advocate for the Military Airlift Command. His boss was a 4-star general, so I reported to a 4-star general and had that gig for a couple of years. Fell in love with Mel. Started having trouble keeping my weight under 200. Since I had 28 years in, I decided it was time to retire. And so I retired and had a big luncheon for me, and the 2-star general came down and pinned a bunch of medals on me. I have a picture of him in my office showing him doing that. And that was my time. I'd serve 1 day a month, 2 weeks during the summer, and then they would send me out on special assignments where they needed either someone with my rank, a colonel, or they needed somebody with my experience. And so that was my career in the military. And as a reward, when I retired, I got full medical benefits for myself and my wife, as well as the privileges of shopping at the commissary and the base exchange, where their prices are supposed to be 30% below the civilian economy. And it's only been relatively recently, the last 10, 15 years maybe, that I've used the commissary. The medical benefits have been absolutely life-saving. The major surgeries that Mel has had alone would have bankrupted us. So it was, for me, it was a wonderful experience. I loved it. And I loved the fact that every once in a while I'd go visit my father in Carmel, and I'd go in my full colonel's uniform just so he could see what I looked like and to let him know that I outranked him. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.